Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to be getting into a little bit more of the customization that's available to utilize with the optimizer without having to rewrite really any of the logic involved, because that's going to be where a lot of the more advanced measures are you can do, is rewriting the actual logic of the optimizer to make some of these things a little more automatic. What we're going to be going over today are a couple different ways that you can have an impact on the end result here, the lineups that you're getting, and how to achieve that. And it's going to be pretty open-ended. It's going to allow you to either take what I'm doing, something like identifying key players and saying, I want these players on my lineups, or I want, at least 3 of these 6 players on every single lineup. You can use this method then to do something as simple as that, or if you want to bring in ownership projections, if you have your own tier list for players, your top tier players, your mid-range, your value players, and then just your low-end players to plug and chug. There's really no limit to what you do here. It's just going to be a matter of how you choose to implement it. So without further ado, let's get going. And before we get going, a word from today's sponsor. Today's video sponsored by me, Nick Sneech. We now have a website up and running that not only gives you another place to follow along and figure out how to optimize your best daily fantasy lineups, but you'll be able to follow along in text format with written tutorials and code markdowns that will allow you to copy and paste code directly from the website into your Jupyter notebook, just like that, with the correct format and everything. Now, you may be thinking, could it get any better than this? Well, let me tell you, it can and it does. Because not only do you have text instructions with copyable code, you also have the video, which you can listen to live and watch while you follow along with the written instructions. On top of that, anytime that we're starting from a non-zero point, aka building on a previous video, which I don't know if you've noticed, but is the majority of this YouTube channel, I will be providing you with the starting code to download as your own Jupyter notebook. That way, if you're making your own tweaks to any little thing that I give you, and then we start a new video, and but you've changed some of these variables, and it's not going to match up, and it's going to be a pain, you can download a clean copy and follow along to learn what we're doing next, and then apply it to your own algorithms at your earliest convenience. So next time you are jonesing for some lineup optimization content, and you just don't feel like coming to YouTube, check out nicksniche.net. We'll be here for you. Enjoy your video today. So, as you can see here, we're going to start with where we ended last time. So this is our most up-to-date optimizer that's going to take the information we've been feeding it, just the simple ID, position, fantasy points per game, salary, and nickname. And we're going to take that, and just to get started here so we don't waste a whole bunch of time generating tons of lineups and waiting around, we're just going to do 15. And then we're going to run it through pandas and clean it up a little bit and drop it out so we can see the actual player names rather than the gross IDs. So let's go ahead and run this through just to kind of refresh everybody's memory. As you can see, we're running through our lineups there. And here we go. So based on that same data set that we've been using since day one, this, 2020-08-08, the August 8th FanDuel slate, and we're just using the same data set over and over again. That way it's going to be consistent results, and we can kind of see what's going on. But based off of this, and assuming that, fantasy points per game is the metric you're using, which, as we all know, is not a great metric to use, but for the sake of clarification here, we're assuming they're going to have a very average game. These would be the best lineups in order with their end score there. Now, how can we tweak this to make it a little bit more successful? Because as you can see here, almost every single lineup has Nurkic and Marcus Morris and almost every single one of them also has Anthony Davis. Let's see. Kawhi Leonard is in every single lineup. Lou Williams is in almost every single lineup. So these don't look terrible. You know, I mean, DeLon Wright, meh, but look at who else we're getting here. Like, there's probably not a lot of salary left to fill out that spot. So that's not, you know, that's not a terrible pickup. Dante DiVincenzo, I don't know. So you definitely run into situations that are not ideal because you're going to have a lot of the same players over and over again. And that, especially going off fantasy points per game, because those numbers are going to be a lot closer together than if you had a predicted metric, because that's going to be a lot more variable based on the matchups they have and if anyone's sitting, if anyone's hurt, etc., etc. So what tends to happen with this setup is it'll pick out, you know, 1, 2, 3 people, or I've had at times that it'll pick up a basement player that's the cheapest there is that happens using a predicted metric. It'll, for whatever reason, think they're going to have a great game, and it'll zero in on them and drop them in all 150 lineups. I've had it happen before. It's terrible. So a way to try to avoid that is going to be to impact how we choose our lineup. And I know, just talking with people down in the comment section of previous videos, there's been several requests to bring in exposure, you know, to avoid just that situation. I don't want one player in more than 20 lineups, let's say. And that's good. That's a smart way to play. We're not quite to that point yet as far as working this out on how to build that into the optimizer. But what we can do, and what I've done with some success, is we're just going to drop in a new variable here. And I'm going to call that key player. And we want, that's going to have to be zeros all the way down. So what we're going to do is we're going to identify a couple key players here. And we're not going to use Nurkic. We're going to go with Rudy Gobert. And let's see how that changes things up. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's do one more. Let's do who's a cheaper one? Salary. Actually, who has a low points per game? Michael Porter. We'll do Michael Porter. Because he's typically not going to get picked here because, you know, he's only got 17 fantasy points per game. And his salary is up there with people averaging 36 and 40, right? Which, if you know anything about the NBA this season, you'd know Michael Porter is a significantly better pickup than 17 fantasy points per game, especially in the bubble there where he was getting some real playing time. So we're just going to save that, and we need to remember what that field is called, key player. We're going to come back to our optimizer. We're going to come up here, and we're going to add key player to our use calls variable, which is just stating the columns we want to bring in. Don't need to change anything here. Don't need to change anything here. And we're going to need to, actually, you know what? We are going to go ahead and drop in key player here, because we're going to need to use that down here. So look at the things we're already looking at. We're looking at salary and we're looking at points, right? Those are the only two parameters we're looking at so far. We also want to look at our new key player variable. So we're going to do the same thing we've done for salary and points. We're going to do keys, pause, equals key. We're going to do key equals list. And we're just going to copy and paste this. Except instead of fantasy points per game, we're going to do key player. And we need to add in a dictionary here as keys to match the dictionary we have down here. Because what these are doing is we're taking our dictionary and we are populating it based on the position, and we're using this key list to populate it with. So our position num available stays the same. Salary cap's the same. All right. So what we need to do here is rewards cost. Let's just do key players. So for KV in underscore vars dot items, we also need to track key players plus equals LP sum keys, and we're going to copy and paste the rest of that because I'm lazy. Okay, so now we're tracking the key player variable as a sum again, which is why we needed zeros for these, because if they come through as nulls or nans, that's not going to play well. So we need to make sure they come through as zeros. So let's go ahead and we need to add prob plus equals LP sum key players. And now this is where you define however you're going to look at it. So we're looking at it as I have 5 players with 1s, the rest with 0s. So let's say I want at least 3, right? At least 3 key players on every roster. So I'll do greater than or equal to 3. And that should be all I need to do. So we'll come back here and we'll re-enter our data frame. Run it again, invalid syntax. What did I forget? For INV, where do I not have an open bracket where I need one? Right there. Okay. And now you'll notice, if you were paying attention, these are going to be lower numbers than before because I'm putting some handicaps on who's getting chosen and not just letting it pick the highest FPPG players there are. So let's go ahead and run through it to the end, and let's see what we get. So now you can already tell I've got Rudy Gobert in a couple of these lineups, because since I did greater than or equal to 3, it's going to immediately go to 3, and then if it can have more, that's fine, but at a minimum it's going to have 3. And now you can already tell that while yes, Marcus Morris is still on every single lineup, we have a lot more variety here. You know, Justin Holiday, Lou Williams is still, DeLon Wright's still there, Giannis still there, but now we've got some Justin Holidays, we've got some Dame Lillards, some Kristaps Porzingis, some Frank Kaminsky even. So we got some more variety. So one way that I like to use this, because you'll still find that you're going to have random people you don't want put on a whole bunch of lineups. So what I like to do is I'll come in here and I'll identify like my, I don't know, 2 or 3 studs, right? Because a lot of your best lineups are going to be, you know, you have the top 2 of the top 3 of the top 5 players for the day. And then you've got some more value picks that overperform for the night, right? So let's rename this to studs. Okay, so who's going to be who are going to be the studs tonight? I think Giannis, Luka, and that's going to be expensive. Well, we're in the bubble, so we're going to go with Luka because Luka was phenomenal in the bubble. I'm going to go with Luka. I'm going to go with... Actually, no, we're going to sort by fantasy points per game, and we're going to see if there's any good values. Nurkic, great value. So we think Luka, we think Nurkic, and who's the next best value person up here? No, you know what? I'm going to go with Michael Porter. Where's Michael Porter? He's all the way down here at 17. Michael Porter. There you are. There. So I got my 3 studs for tonight. Nurkic, Doncic, and Michael Porter. Okay. So we save. Now, let's say we also want to define value players. So these could be anywhere from a bench player, where the starter that starts in front of them is out, so they're going to have a lot more minutes. So you're looking at value there. They're going to have a lot more time on the floor. So even if they don't have a great night, you know, they're not setting any records, but if they're normally out there 8 minutes a night and tonight they're going to be out there 28 minutes, that's a whole lot of opportunities for rebounds, assists, points, anything really. So you may think they're a great value if they're priced really low. It could be if they have a low projected ownership. If that's what you're looking at, could be the same thing. So I'm going to go with Jordan Clarkson. I'm going to go with Tim Hardaway. I've had him come through for me several times. And we're going to go with Dragic, because he clearly has not been repriced for how well he was playing for Miami in the bubble. So now that gives me 3 studs, 3 values, and that's going to leave 3 left over. And let's make sure our position's going to be fine. And this is where it gets a little frustrating, because you kind of have to pay attention, because if you have 2 shooting guards as a stud and then a shooting guard as a value, and you try to have all 6 of them, you're obviously not going to be able to. So we have center, shooting guard, point guard, small forward, shooting guard. Was that 3 shooting guards or 2 shooting guards? I think that's 2. And then we have Michael Porter all the way down here at power forward. Okay, so that should be okay. We'll run it. We might get an error. We'll find out. So then we come back and we need to remember to bring in our new columns, studs and value. So we'll come back to the top. Rename this to studs and then give me value. Okay. Rename this to studs. Value. Alright, and same thing here. We're just going to call this stud, studs, values, we'll copy and paste this, value, stud, value. Nope, the field is studs with an S. Okay. And then we need to add it down here. Values, pause, equals, value, equals stud. Okay. So now we just did the same thing with values. So now we're bringing in both of those variables. And all we have to do is come right down here and rename these again and do another one for value, values, studs, values. Okay, and actually, since we're already using stud, values, value up here, we're going to change this to stud track, value track. Oh. Is that right? Yeah. Value track. And then we pull in studs from up here, just like salaries, points. Good, 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 good. Okay, so now we need to define those constraints into our optimizer. So we want prob plus equals LP sum of stud track to equal 3. And just an example, so it's easy to tell, I picked 3 of each, so we're going to go 3 and 3, and that way all of our studs and all of our value picks in this example should be in every single lineup. So, stud track, value track, equals 3. Alright, that should do it for us. And remember, we have our little snip we took earlier that was just using our stud where we had 330. So now let's see if our defined studs and value give us a better lineup. Oh no, much worse. So now you can see when we define 6 of the 9 positions, we're dropping about 30 points per lineup, almost exactly across the board for the top 15 there. Not ideal, but this does give us more control. So now you can see Nurkic is on every single lineup, Michael Porter's on every single lineup, Dragic, Clarkson, and Doncic. And then these are the more optimizer chosen players. Small forward 1. I thought we picked Tim Hardaway. Did we? We did. We picked Tim Hardaway. So yeah, so Tim Hardaway. So we picked 2 shooting guards. So Doncic and Clarkson are on every lineup, right? And then Tim Hardaway is going to be on every lineup. He's just going to kind of bounce between spots, though. Then we have Dragic, Porter, Nurkic. Okay, and you can do that for a variety of things. We used to. You could have 3. You could have 4. You could have 5. You could have all sorts of different parameters that could be filled out across the board. So let's say, for instance, we have ownership projection, and we want you to equal, okay, so let's say we have ownership projections, right? And these are completely randomized, obviously. So that's not going to be ideal because it's going to be harder in the results to kind of see how it's working. But let's say we wanted the total on the team. And this takes a little bit of getting used to, but if we have, you know, a 1 is 100% ownership projection down to, let's say, 30%. You would need to figure out some sort of arbitrary amount that you want the team total to sum to. Would be the easiest way to do it, because then we could still just use the LP sum and drop it right in and just look at another variable, right? That would be the easiest way. And then the whole team, the sum of all of the ownership projections are going to be less than or equal to, I don't know, let's just say, for point of contention here, that you want every player to average out to be, I don't know, 0.5. Okay, that times 9 players is going to be 4.5. So we'll use that just as an estimate. All right. Let's save it. We'll bring ownership projection in. And we'll do just ownership projection instead of our studs and values this time. How about that? That's how we're going to change it up. And we'll see how different the lineup gets. So now we also need... Was that? Why did I close that? I'm such a moron. Ownership projection. And we'll go ahead and zoom in here again for you, everybody. All right. So we're going to need ownership projection as well. And the same thing here. And ownership. Owner. Whoa. ownership projection. Yep. Okay. And then we'll do owners pos equals owner. Okay, so let's go ahead and run that. Owners is not defined. Ownerships. Ta-da. Okay, now we come down here and we need to add it here. And here first, actually. Owner track. And again, these are just arbitrary variable names. If you do use something other than what I'm showing here, just make sure to carry through and replace it everywhere it's called on. That's really all you need to worry about if you want to do it your own way. Owner track plus equal LP sum. Owners. And then we're going to just comment out these two. If you're not familiar, putting a pound sign in front of a line of code, at least in Python, comments it out so it's not used when the code is compiled and ran. It ignores this, and it's just there as a reference. What it'll a lot of times be used for, if you write good, clean code, which obviously I do not, you could be putting in notes to yourself in the comments, like defining constraints / parameters for optimizer. So that way, if anyone else pulls up this code, they can see, you know, oh, that's what we're doing here. Okay, that makes sense. I know why we're doing it now. Obviously, I don't do that. I just make a YouTube video and talk about it while I do it, so you know. Prob plus equals LP sum. And now we want to do owner track less than or equal to 4.5. Okay, so like we just said, that's going to come out to the entire team averaging out to no more than 50% ownership projection based on these completely made up randomized numbers that mean absolutely nothing. Okay, so let's run that and see. Now we're back up here at 342, 341. That's good. That's better than before, but again, this is completely randomized, so it doesn't make much of a difference. Now we look at it, and we're pretty much back to where we started, since those are randomized projections. You'll get players like Giannis is now in everything, and he wasn't before. You get a little bit of variety based on what the numbers are, but if you have your own ownership projections and you want to do it, I would tinker with it a little bit and try and zero in on a good ownership percentage that you want. Alternatively, one suggestion I have, if you're interested in doing, especially like the studs and the values like this, is I've done it a lot of times just using the studs, not even defining value players. And I'll define like 3 guys that I want on lineups, and I'll make 25 lineups that have those 3 guys on it, guaranteed. And then I'll pick another combination of 3 stars for the night and do that, and another combination. And instead of doing one big 150 lineup block, I'll break it down into maybe 6 25 lineup blocks. But each of those 6 blocks is going to be specified to give me a little bit more control over it, rather than just trying to make an overly complex set of parameters and rules just to run 150 at once. Because I mean, you see how fast it runs. Here, let's do it for 25. I guess we need 26 if we're going to get 25. So let's start this over. And we are going to ignore this as well. So this is back to just straight fantasy points per game. Like it can make 25 lineups pretty quick. So I'm not too concerned with having to do that a couple times, you know. That to me is more valuable, to have several smaller, more targeted runs of my optimizer, rather than having one big one where you can, I mean, you can come in here, you can put in as many parameters as you want, and as long as you don't make it so that it's impossible for the optimizer to spit out a correct answer, then you're just going to keep getting it. And you can make it so complex, and there's that many more potential points of failure. And that's what I try to avoid, because if something goes wrong, I want to be able to look and say, okay, that's what went wrong. You know, it was this line here, this parameter, so I can go in and I can fix that parameter. If I have 20 or 30 parameters in here and I keep getting an error message, well, something was wrong here, but maybe something else was wrong here and something else was wrong here, and now I have to keep going back and fixing, you know, the first one it comes across in the error message, fix that, then run it again and go find the next one, and man, no thank you. But yeah, so that's a nice easy way that you can kind of bring in your own, take your own spin on it, you know, really make it your own without having to have a more in-depth understanding of how to edit this, or have a good understanding of pulp, or a good understanding of linear programming, or anything like that. You can just take what you have, copy paste it, put your new variables in, and then define the parameter down here and run it. I have come across some situations, I'm not sure why, but sometimes it has thrown, and instead of telling me that it's not solvable, it will solve it and just ignore the positional constraint here. I don't know why. I didn't create Pulp. Pulp's an open source Python package. But for some reason, I've had situations where it's given me, you know, 10 players instead of 9 or something like that. And going back and looking at it, it was because something like this I had done had made it unsolvable within the 9 positions. And instead of saying, oh, sorry, that's unsolvable as it is, it just breaks that rule and keeps going. So keep an eye on it. If it does that and you're using this method down here to stay in pandas, you're going to get an error message. Like for instance, if we just come up here and say you can have 2 centers now. Well, that didn't change. I guess we still have the salary cap restriction. And it's going to give me an error because it's expecting 10 elements based on the column names I'm giving it. And there's 11. So if it throws an error, you're going to find out real quick. It's not going to be like you're trying to submit it to FanDuel or DraftKings as a big bulk upload, and then you realize there's an error, and now it's, you know, it's almost tip off, and the lineups are locking, and you're not going to get them. And nothing like that, unless you're doing this at the absolute last second. And then I don't know what to tell you. This helps. I hope this answers quite a few of the questions I've gotten about how to handle things like ownership projections and really setting. I know this doesn't directly address exposure because it's not limiting the number of times someone does show up on a lineup, but I think you'll find that this really increases the variability of your lineups if done with that in mind. It could definitely take away from the variability too. You know, if you have the 4 most expensive players on the slate you demand in every lineup, then obviously the rest of your players are going to be scraping from that same bottom of the barrel salary wise, and they're probably all going to be the same. But the more you can define, and keeping in mind that we're dropping the salary cap we're looking at each iteration, it becomes pretty fair. There are going to be a few instances. Oh, yeah, that's right. There will be a few instances where you have 1 or 2 guys that end up just coming through. It's in the sweet spot for the optimizer. It's low salary. It's above average for that salary point projection. And the optimizer is going to take it and it's going to plug it in as much as it can. And that is what it is. Eventually we'll get to a point where we can check back in existing lineups and count how many times the players are used within that data set, and then get a maximum function there to make sure, or a minimum, just like we're doing here. It'd basically be looking at it like another parameter. It's a little more complex though, and we're not quite there, but we're going to get there. We'll be able to account for teams as well. I've been working on that to get as an easier way to do it. I'm looking at rewriting some of this as well to make it a little more user-friendly, so we can avoid this, having to remove the positional argument there from the ID number, since each player has their own unique ID number. So we got a lot of things in the work. We're going to get to some machine learning as well, and how to create our own prediction algorithms for the players. Yeah, so if there's anything along those lines that you're specifically interested in, make sure to let me know down in the comments, and I will do my best to continue to answer any questions that come up in the comments that I'm able to in a YouTube comment format. And yeah, if you have any other ideas for things you'd like to see, let me know. Some things that have bounced around a little bit. The website was obviously a big one. I think that is going to greatly help both sides, just as I mentioned in the last video. I don't really have much in the way of doing like a weekly projection live stream or anything prior to kickoff, like for Sunday for NFL, mainly because I don't do much for NFL. If the NBA were still in season, that's something that I would be up for doing. Anything you'd like to see, a format, whether some sort of a live stream or a different type of video you'd be interested in, let me know, and I would be more than happy to take into consideration. Thanks everyone, see you next time.